So here we are on the Care to Share podcast. Today I'm with Michael Butcher. Michael Butcher is finance director of the Blackadder Care Group, which have care homes across the UK. He's worked with numbers all his life, but the thing about Michael that's really interesting to me is that he understands the numbers in a way that shows you the real world impact, but he also cares quite heavily and puts the two together nicely. So today we're going to speak about a crisis, genuine crisis that is heading for the UK and other parts of the world that most people are not yet aware of, and that is birth decline and subsequent population collapse. So with that joyful note, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me be Cassandra on this one and saying, hey, here's your existential crisis for the week. Brilliant.
So today, what I want to do, and what I was saying offline a second ago, is I want the audience to come away with a tangible sense of what the decline in birth rate in the UK means for the UK and UK social care. I think when I've looked at this, I happen to be fascinated by it, but I do find it hard to grasp when the projected figures are 2060, and you're looking ahead 30 years into the future. It's very difficult to take that problem seriously. And there are a lot of things that can change in that time. But I think what people don't realize is actually it takes a long time to make the changes, because we're talking about birth and a human life. People need 30 years to be 30. So that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to give people context of the numbers. I'd like to talk about the impact on social care. I'd like to discuss UK culture and other cultures that might be impacting why we have less children. And I'd also like to discuss, is there a way that technology can save us from this? Honestly, I doubt it, but I'm sure it can help. So that's a conversation I'd love to have today. Shall we start by discussing the overview of the problem and getting an idea of some kind of context on numbers and where we are?
Okay. Really good start point. Let's start with a really simple number, which is 2. 2 is the minimum number of children a woman can have if we are going to maintain population at a constant level, on the assumption that you only have one life partner and the two of you create 2 children, and that just keeps going on, right? 2 and 2 and 2. The UK birth rate at the moment, 1.54. What that means is that every generation, the number of children being born is less than the number of adults that spawned them. Implications. For every 100 people alive in the UK today, we will have 54 grandchildren if this rate continues. That is the most basic way that I found so far of describing the scale of the challenge that we are facing. It is not an if at the moment. It is these numbers are baked in. This is what is going to happen. There is a little bit of a caveat to that. What we are going to come on to talk about is some ONS data around population estimates. There are 3 bounds on that: high, medium, and low fertility rates. And the ONS and everyone else always takes medium bound. The lower bound is worse than this. So if we continue to see the cultural challenges that we're going to face, the numbers that we're about to talk about are a heck of a lot worse. But yeah, let's focus on some core numbers. We need 2 children to maintain our population at the current rate, and we currently have a birth rate below that. This is not a problem that is unique to the United Kingdom. This is across pretty much the entire world. The exception, interestingly, is largely Africa. Also, interestingly, Afghanistan, which has a really high fertility rate at the moment, oddly. But fundamentally, Africa. But actually, if you look at the historic trends, even Africa's fertility rate is dropping. And it's dropping by 1 child every 10 years or so. So before they were having 8, then 7, now we're down at the 6 and the 5s. So there seems to be this trend internationally that we are having fewer children, and that fertility rates, it might be a fertility rate thing, it might be a social thing, it might be an economic thing, it might be a broader thing. And just to put a full stop at this. This is an absolute existential threat, not just to social care, but to human civilization as we currently know it. How do we know that? This has happened before. In ancient Rome, you needed about 6 to 7 children per female to maintain the population rate, because high number of women dying at birth, low age of mortality, nasty brutish time, what have you. We know that at Herculaneum and Pompeii, the average Roman woman was having 2 children. And you can accurately map that period to the decline of the Roman Empire. So the societal crashes that we've seen, the Mayans, the Persians, ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt, this has happened before, and it's very much largely due to this birth rate issue that we're about to discuss.
That I did not know.
Happy to teach. The problem is there are other reasons for it. The Mayan culture, Chichen Itza, for example, there was a small issue of the fact that they were decapitating people, throwing their heads into water, and then the water became poisoned. So you actually had some really large issues causing plague and what have you. There are other societal reasons why certain economies fell. For example, the collapse of Rome, there was an invasion by outside forces who were able to get through the hinterland, come down through Italy and invade Rome. Now, the reason that happened is because the Roman army was weakened by the fact they didn't have enough people in there. Because all the Roman citizens there were fewer of them, fewer younger Romans, so they were basing themselves on foreign legionnaires who were like, well, hang on a minute, I'm now fighting against my neighbour for Rome, which is 100,000 miles that way or whatever, never even been there. Now you guys walk on straight through, you crack on. So we can't just look at this as one problem. It's not just we're not having enough kids. There's a huge societal thing here, which has been baked in since the 1960s.
No, go on. I'm thinking.
So let's talk about social care where we are today, and sort of talk about the problem that we're facing at the moment and the problem that we will have in the next 5 years.
Could you also, before we move on to social care, shall we do Japan and South Korea, who are experiencing where we might be? Because one of the things that really stood out to me is there is a world where schools shut down because there are no children to fill them. And this will move on to social care. But if there is no young workforce to contribute to the economy, there is no way that we can support things like the NHS and subsequently social care. So maybe that's all. Maybe that's all we need to get right in there. But South Korea's birth rate is like 0.7, I think.
Yep, about that.
And Japan is very low also. And
so,
we live longer, right? So the problem sort of gets bigger on both sides. If we're having less kids, but also we live longer, we need to support the elder generation more than we ever had to before.
Yes. So for any of you who are interested where these stats are about to come from, Wikipedia, list of countries by total fertility rate. Europe, average fertility rate 1.5. America's 1.8. Asia 1.9. The lowest nation, Hong Kong, 0.8. South Korea, 0.9. The 0.7 comes from that Kyrgyzstan video, which, if no one has seen it, Kyrgyzstan on YouTube, brilliant account, definitely worth watching. Spain, 1.3 births per woman. Italy, 1.3. Portugal 1.4, Finland 1.4, Greece 1.4. The list goes on. What we're seeing in South Korea already, and it's a really good case study, is you're seeing the younger population forcibly being moved into more urban areas because that's where the work is. South Korea doesn't really have the land mass to have a large rural population, never really did, but what rural population was there is now where's the facilities, where's the healthcare, where are the jobs, where are the children, where are the schools? We need to relocate there. Roll this forward 40 years without major change. I think we're now saying that the population of South Korea will be down to one grandchild. One for every 100 people is one grandchild if you continue these downward trends. It's a couple of generational shifts. It's a similar challenge in Japan, a birth rate there of 1.3. They've had this they've had a very healthy older population. And because of the economic position they've been in, they've been dealing with this for longer. And one, keeping their elder population more active and more socially engaged. But also, it's Japan, they're working much more on the technology front around robots, AI, and other support networks to support that. But you're absolutely right. What we are already seeing in the crystal ball that is South Korea and Japan is that once this population fertility rate, birth rate starts dropping, it keeps dropping. And the impact is you have fewer working people to do the work, and importantly, fewer working people to pay the taxes, to have the social security net, to pay pensions, to pay for healthcare, to pay for social care, to pay everything that we need to have, to keep the economy running. And as a result, the economy stops because you no longer have a central government going, well, we'll pay for all these things. The country stops functioning. And you could very well see that in South Korea in the not too distant future.
And once there is fewer funding for health and social care, the small population that has been forced to work more also needs to spend their time looking after the older population because there is nobody else there to do it.
And it just becomes self-perpetuating.
Yeah. And I keep thinking of this, like there's pictures you see where, if you're lucky enough to have a great grandparent and you get all the family in and you go, wow, look at all the children that have been spawned from this. Those pictures are, when I picture it in my head now, it's that family is smaller and smaller. When you're talking about, in the future in South Korea, 100 grandparents and one grandchild, most of those pictures would just be one or two people. That's the entire family left. Okay. So yes, where are we today in social care?
So today in social care, I'll take you back to the 1960s, where we've got a population boom, and those individuals are now in their 80s and are starting to come into social care. They are coming in after a pretty good life, to be fair. They're coming in typically with property assets. They're coming in with having been in pretty good health, and the scientific advances that we've had have meant that their life expectancy has gone up from 67 through to about 83, roughly, between male and female. And that's been pretty consistent actually now. That 83, 87 is pretty standard now for the last 5 or 6 years that most people will be living to. The problem that we have is that individuals, as they live longer, develop more health challenges, more comorbidities. And we also have a curious issue in the United Kingdom of letting our old people live in their own homes alone for longer. We don't have a more European model of community care and of older people living in not care homes, but care facilities, a sort of like a McCarthy and Stone concept, multiple flats, but to take the Netherlands model where you have younger people living there as well. And so you have an integrated community. As a result, you reduce loneliness, you reduce depression, you reduce anxiety, you reduce stress. Older people have a better quality of life. We don't have that model in this country, and as a result, our older population are coming into social care, particularly where we are in elder person dementia care in care homes, with much higher levels of acute challenging behaviour and some complexities around their dementia. It's not a clinical health nursing need necessarily. There is a market for that, but that's not our specialism. But around behaviours, that is really challenging at the moment. So that's where we currently are. We have about 400,000 people in care homes in England. We have about 440,000 beds. The number of beds that we have last year increased by about 82. That's not 1,000, that's 82. So we have an aging population. Over the next 20 years, he said, grabbing some notes. So we currently have a population of 68 million people in the UK, according to the ONS. That will increase to 75 million in 2040. If you keep running that forward, by the time we get to 2060, it's 74 million. So the population actually rises and then is static. Those aged over 65 will be over a quarter of our population by 2060. and those over 85 will triple to 5.1 million. From a supply-demand perspective, we're simply just going to have more older people living in this country. We are not materially increasing the number of beds in our in our care facilities, and also what we are doing is we're not materially increasing the number of workers per older person. So in 2047, the working age population of the UK will be about 50 million, and there will be about 15.1 million people of pensionable age. So that's a 3.3 ratio of older persons to working age. At the moment, there are approximately 43 million people who are of working age, compared with 12 million pensioners. It's a 3.6 ratio. So we have fewer workers, fewer tax, fewer people who can deliver the care, fewer people who can provide the infrastructure around which we provide care, and we have an increasing number of pensioners. So looked at from a purely selfish social care perspective, I'm really excited, because the future of our sector is actually one of really high demand, and no one's building new care home beds, so actually supply is static or decreasing. Economics says, okay, that's got to be good for my fees, right?
Yeah.
But there is still this existential threat of, where do I find the workers to actually deliver the care? Then you broaden that out and say, well, what about domiciliary care? What about palliative? What about mental health and ABI? What about youth, social care? All of a sudden, all of those workers, where are they coming from? And that's before we talk about retail, hospitality, and all the other sectors that are larger employers and have this, we're all fishing from the same pool of potential employees.
Do you have any idea of, because what was really clear is you said there's 400,000 people in social care and about 440,000 beds. But then at some point in the future, there's going to be 15 million people over the age of 85. How many of, what percentage of people over the age of 85 generally end up needing a care home bed?
So this is what has been quite remarkable over the last 20, well, we've been in this business since 1997. The number of people in care homes has remained static. What's happened is that more people have been cared for in the community. So, but there has to, I think what you're digging at is, what is the point at which we have this crossover of, there is a rising population, but there aren't enough beds in in care homes to meet the elder person demand. One of the firms, I think it was Knight Frank, put the data around about 2035. That was just after COVID. My genuine view is that is an overestimate, and I think we could be looking at 2030.
That is round the corner.
I think they were assuming that there was going to be a massive explosion of new build care homes coming out of COVID. That simply isn't happening. And that's driven by planning, but also, frankly, the hideous cost of materials and the cost of build at the moment. It's just making it economically non-viable.
Yeah. And one of the things we're doing, which I believe is partly the reason why our population is growing, is a heavy immigration, which helps with the workforce, but ultimately leads to more older people in the UK. Is that correct?
So that's why we are going to see this increase from 68 million now to 78 million in 15 years' time. The plateauing, though, to 74 million by 2060 is because you're always going to have this level of immigration, but the underlying population and birth rate keeps dropping off.
Yeah.
That, by the way, of course, presents a whole range of societal challenges of, how do we integrate a very significant number of immigrants into this country successfully, given the current geopolitics and actually their cultural balances within social care. How do we make sure that the care that they're providing and they're used to providing in their home country is the same as what we're providing? That's a very operational challenge of immigration that we as a care provider are actually facing.
It's a really, I think as well, what people do is, out of the goodness of their heart, just assume that that's an easy fix because you can just be kind to people. Culture doesn't necessarily, like, what's kind in one culture and another are very different. And what is, I suppose, acceptable in one culture to another is very different. And once you're looking at day to day, how two people get along, you need to integrate carefully. And I think we make the mistake of thinking that because I mean, life is pretty peachy here in the UK in many ways, that we just assume integration will be peachy. And that's, I mean, if anybody's been to a new school as a kid, you'll understand, like, even that is a weird experience, and there is conflict there, and it's something that needs to be done delicately. Moving jobs, moving town, and that's within the UK. So when you've
Yeah.
got large numbers of people settling in another area, like I grew up in Slough, for instance, and so what you'd have is the road next to my street had a mosque and a really big Muslim community.
Mm.
That was a community,
Mm.
and I grew up with it, and it's like, yeah, that's just that's fine. But you have to think, and then I think we got Sikh schools and Muslim schools, and I went to a Catholic school, although I was technically Church of England, and I'm not religious now. But I was watching it happen going, hold on, there's a lot of segregation happening here because groups are separating off. And long term, that makes for I think, very difficult, I don't know what to call it, but just how a society gets along, even in a single town. Very different sets of rules because you've gone to have very different upbringings.
Yeah. I worked in Slough and lived in Maidenhead for a number of years, actually. Yeah, even if you go Slough to Maidenhead, which is a couple of minutes down the M4, chalk and cheese environment. And then you go slightly south of Slough, and you're in Eton and Windsor. And oh my word, that's an entirely different culture. So yeah, completely echoing that. But it's as if we're talking about bringing people from a different culture into the UK, we've had to tell the people we've brought over from India why you don't put gravy on lasagna.
Interesting.
Yeah, here's how you prepare an apple in England. As well as, by the way, here's when you're supporting someone to stand up from their chair. This is why you don't grab them by both arms. You actually have to use a sling and a hoist and what have you. So the more functional aspects of integration is going to be a huge part of this challenge, and we're going to have to accept that we have I don't think. Back up 2 steps. I'm actually really angry with the current political establishment. I wouldn't say that this is against any political colour or creed. I think the problem that we have is they're not talking openly and in a transparent term about the challenges that we face. The Labour government is currently talking about a growth agenda. They don't actually mean that. It's code for we need more tax. If we have growing companies, we have more revenue, we have more absolute profit, we have more corporation tax. If people are paid more, they will pay more in PAYE and national insurance contributions. That is their solution for this problem that we have around diminishing birth rates. If we have fewer workers, the only way you can pay for stuff, because inflation, is that we have to tax more. We have to charge more that way. Similarly, and I don't understand why reduction in fertility rate is not being discussed more broadly, but the governments, both the Conservatives and the current Labour, are both saying, "Oh, we need to cap immigration. We need to, really watch out for this." That is actually incredibly economically damaging for the reason we've just identified, and we need to be having a conversation of, look, guys, this is the reason why we need immigration. It is not to do with saving the NHS. It's not to do with the fact that we're a liberal democracy and this is the right thing to do. It's fundamentally because if we don't, there's South Korea and Japan. That is what is going to happen. And
Yeah.
And that's my anger and my frustration of all of this, is that the political classes just simply aren't talking about it.
I'm 33, and my eldest son turned 5 on Monday. I just had a party on the weekend. I had one friend with children to invite. And I was looking around, it's so weird. Out of all my friends of uni, one of them, he's had a kid, but he's moved to Australia. Another one, she's further up north in the country. The one that is within an hour and a half is the only person left with a kid. Everybody else, they live in London, they're doing their thing, and they don't have kids. So there's a few reasons that I know culturally from personal anecdotal experience, and I think you can zoom out and I think it stands. I've heard people saying children are bad for the environment and I care about climate change. I have heard a friend of mine, she's done so well in her career. And I remember I think I spoke to her when we were about 30, and maybe I think I was about to have my first kid. And I remember I was sort of like, you'll settle down, like you're married, and I remember her telling me off to be like, you can't tell me this. And a few years down the line, she's not been successful yet. And there's this, with her and her partner, there is this just race to try and solve this problem now. But at the time, amazing lifestyle, amazing career. And I think that's what's happening to so many people, which is there is a lot of life to be lived and there are a lot of personal freedoms. And having children really does take that away from you. And I think people assume, strangely, they assume at 35, 37, you can you'll be okay and you can sort of have kids. And, some people can, but it's much less likely. And the other thing that nobody thinks about is, okay, if you have one at 35, it might be at least 18 months until you have another. You don't have long to grow a family at all, which is why I think it's like 50% of women in the UK are childless at 30. And then, and it's not, I don't think it's because they're all having fertility issues. I think it's because things are going great and they're building careers and they don't want to lose that freedom and the fulfilling career that they have. But it's just like we're talking about. The problem really comes when you turn 50 and where are you? You don't have that choice to make. And it's unfortunately just the case that if a 50-year-old guy wants to turn around and have a family, he sort of can. I mean, it's a very different problem between the sexes.
It's worth highlighting that this is, I think, why we need to have this very open and transparent conversation. And as a white middle-class male, it is never my place to say to anyone, this is what we should do. So what I'm hoping here is say something and then let the conversation carry on elsewhere and with the appropriate people. I have a 12-year-old daughter, just entered secondary school, loving life, and I need for her to have the hard-won freedoms that women have and the equality. I needed to have her life and the way that she wants to do it. Yes, and yes, it absolutely must be her body, her choice. I support her. I wish she didn't roll up her skirt and I wish she didn't wear as much makeup, and we have some interesting, challenging conversations. So this is not a conversation about the removal of women's rights. It's a very challenging conversation, right? Okay, how do we balance the need for women to have these rights and to have absolute equality, but also at the same time recognizing you're the ones who have got to have the children. We're not going down some sort of, forced arranged marriage route. This isn't sort of some sort of, what was that TV show? Handmaid's Tale. It's not some sort of dystopian future like that. There has to be a conversation where we can balance this, or genuinely have a conversation. Okay, we are in a managed decline. Here's the glide path, and this is what the longer term solution is. It needs to be a societal level conversation, and we're not having it.
Do you think it is? So, for instance, for me, I'm about to have my third child. Well, my wife's going to have our third child in about 4 weeks. My goal is to give her the choice whether or not she wants to work. Once we've got 3 children, like she owns her own company. She's so busy. She's in London today. I had to pick her up a few weeks ago because she called me and said, I feel like I'm about to pass out. And I'm like, I know, because you're really pregnant and you're working too hard.
Yep.
But, and so we talk about maternity leave and paternity leave and balances. And I want to live in a world where everybody can have both. But it is very difficult to be at the top of your game in your career and at the top of your game in parenting. And there are some other biological truths about child rearing and who gives the child what. For instance, it's really interesting. Like, apparently dads get it's oxytocin release from like rough and tumble play, and mums get it from much more nurturing behaviors. And this will be different for different parents, but these are generals. And when we're talking about a population, the generals are what you need to go with. And so I want my wife. I think she has built such an amazing company and has got an amazing career. By the point where we're having 3 children, which is what we want, but also perhaps entirely necessary, right, for the society, how can we, at least in the first year of our children's life, how can she give them everything that she possibly can, which is what she wants to do? and continue to build an amazing company. That's why I think the conversation is so difficult, because I think it's really it's really important to support as much as we can, but everything has a trade-off. And I suppose being a parent shouldn't be settling for the lesser because you have to be a parent. I think part of the conversation needs to be about how great it is to be a parent, and careers are wonderful too, but I don't think they're better. I don't think it's the goal that you then have to take less of to have the kid. I don't know. Maybe I'm going in circles. It's difficult to talk about.
It is, because we're talking about the rights and needs of two people, partners, against the societal expectations and demands. We have to recognize that there is still that, expectation of, you get married, you have kids, but there's a pathway, right? Versus what we actually want as individuals and what our career aspirations are. And for my wife's part, she was the one who said, I want to have my first kid before I'm 30. That was on our first date. It was a very clear expectation, by the way. Always good. My wife's always been good at setting those clear demands on me, which is appreciated
for you, because you map that out.
Oh yeah, it was useful. These are the rules. He's a qualified primary school teacher. So when the first kid came, Matthew, my son, she said, right, I'll stop work for a bit, go on maternity leave, but I want to keep training, want to keep teaching part time, but we'll balance it. Great, not a problem. Second one came along. She said, we're going to relocate the whole family to where my parents are, down in Bournemouth, which is where I am. Great. And we've been lucky enough that the conversation between the two of us has been her saying, I want to be this mother figure. This is more important to me than my job. Michael, you go and earn the money and I'll do this mother thing. And we've got a really supportive network down here who, interestingly and similarly to you, so we had my son when I was 28. It took until I was 35 that the rest of our friendship groups started having, where we could say, actually, we've got this friendship group with. So I don't think what you're going through is uncommon. And I'm 43 now, so 10 years sort of ahead of you. And I recognize that. But it's not easy. I think it's easy to have that conversation as a couple. Yeah. And there's always going to be a power dynamic there as to whose career is, quote unquote, more important, and who wants to be the parental figure more and do more of that nurturing stuff that is necessary with children. And sometimes we have to think, well, actually, the right thing to do is to relocate. We've got this great life in London, but your parents are elsewhere, and that's the support network, the grandparent support network. So we need to relocate to support that. They will support the children, and we can support, the grandparents as we get older. So we've got to have this, I think, we've got this really fragmented society. The nuclear family no longer exists. And I think part of the solution to the longer term fertility rate problem might actually be we actually now need to come back together again.
I really agree. And I just want to caveat what I said earlier, which was when I was talking about, what the trade-offs are, etc. I am a very hands-on dad, to the point where I had to learn from watching when we had our first child where I just need to back off, because there's nothing I could do. I was really like, if I could have breastfed, I would have done it, right? And it was after I had to learn, actually, this just is not my place. I just need to look after my wife here and let her do her thing. But yeah, so one of the problems is that it's very easy to move around. And we, for instance, have been fortunate enough to get on the property ladder early for the average person and live within close proximity to our parents. The furthest I live away from my parents, which is 1 hour, they still come over once a week. My wife's parents live a 5-minute drive away. That allows us to both work and both have our own companies. And even then it's difficult. And yeah, so part of the problem is if you can't settle down and, for instance, you look at, nursery fees, you just go, it's actually not possible. Because a lot of people then have a child and then go, okay, they need to be in nursery 5 days a week. Where's all my money gone that I've worked so hard to build the career to earn? So yes, bringing the family back together, which is a much more complex problem, I think, than looking at the numbers and going, we need to reach these numbers. All right, so In terms of technology, how do we hold back the wave of birth decline? Now, two things. In Japan, I've seen, I showed you yesterday, is something called AirEC, and that's helping people roll over in beds. And there's also robots helping people, elderly people, with their movement and dancing. And to be honest, that looks a bit dystopian, but when your population is where it is, you need to do what you need to do. In the UK, we have all sorts of like sensors for whether people have fallen or whether they're moving in their beds. These are all things that offload the workload of a carer. So they're all good, that we amplify our productivity there. But can we do enough to give ourselves the time? I don't know.
The answer is no. So you've got 2 problems. The first is there is going to come it's probably going to take 2 generations, so 40 years, for this to resolve itself. Even if the Labour government said, tell you what, here is a tax break to have more children, you're still going to have to go through the process of children being born today, 20 years, and then next generation, before you actually start to see us crest out of this. So I don't think technology solves that fundamental problem. What we are talking about is managing the decline of the workforce to create, and using technology to mitigate that risk and to mitigate those challenges. For me, I think there are sort of 3 main areas around that, and just focusing particularly on older person social care. What we are spectacularly good at in elder person social care, without wanting to be, is disabling of an individual. So we take their current abilities and we sort of allow those to drift and decline and meander. What great social care is if not re-ablement, then certainly maintaining that ability. And I think technology has a huge part to play in supporting that through mental capability, supporting the physical side of it and helping them to move and what have you. There is an element of social. Zoom calls are great, but they miss something. And I think having a robot talk to you or AI talk to you is great, but again, it's going to miss something. So I think technology has a part to play there in providing support and removing the need for a worker to do that. The second thing that technology will do is it is going to speed up tasks. It's going to automate. It's going to make them safer or easier. So the robot doing manual handling, for moving and handling, for example, that is going to be a key part of it. Data analysis is another part. We no longer have to go, okay, I need to grab the data and I need to turn it into a chart or something. AI is now just already doing that for us, and that's really exciting. And the third thing that AI and technology will do is this proactive intervention. So we've got AI looking at data models and then saying, okay, this is what has happened before. This is the trend. You need to do this.
Yep.
And that will help support our older people into better health as we go forward. So I think technology will make life easier. I think it will make care better. It will remove certain tasks, but it won't remove jobs and it won't remove work, because what we're doing there is we're giving the carers and the managers more time to care and actually to demonstrate those human skills, the leadership, the socialization, the time to go and stand with someone and hold their hand. Or I was at one of our care homes yesterday in Northleach, gentleman's birthday. We gathered round with a cake, with some candles, and sang happy birthday. It took a minute or 2. Happy birthday, well done, you've made it to, he thought 45 actually, in his 80s. That's a human touch and a human quality that a robot or technology could never do. And that, I think, is what we need to be able to be using technology for. Get rid of the irrelevant task that could be done another way, a better way. Let's focus on being human and giving everything that we've got. If it is this, this last flicker of the current view of what human civilization is, let's make it human.
So I think that, well, first of all, I agree. When I think further into the potential of technology, I think a lot of the things that are missing when a robot or an AI interacts with somebody is chemical. Whether it's you hug somebody for 20 seconds and there is an oxytocin release of some sort, or, eye contact does this to people and it makes you feel a certain way. Now, can that actually be done with technology and chemistry? probably one day. At the point where you are literally replacing how you feel, I mean, I suppose, antidepressants are sort of on their way to that's the same vein. But at the point where to substitute human interaction, we just take, some sort of pill, I suppose we lose any sense of what it is to be human, which is why I'm constantly thinking about the Matrix movies. And I'm just thinking, does technology take us to a place where you live in a pod and have the experience of life without actually having the experience of life? I don't want to. Is it ever going to be possible? Potentially. But it's as bad as...
You weren't working in social care during COVID, mate. And so, welcome to my office, by the way. It is about 10 foot by 10 foot. This was my pod during COVID. My experience of life was Zoom calls, emails, looking out the window, and occasionally going for a walk. But I did some exercise at home. That dystopian future that you're talking about is not a million miles away, particularly with how remote work has suddenly boomed, which, by the way, is why, whilst I recognise the need for flexible working, quite an important thing, I'm a huge one for getting people to an office, meaning place of work, not because I'm a slave master and I only think you work in an office. It's the socialization bit, it's the human bit. You generate so much human value, not corporate value, not money, not anything. You solve problems and you get benefits from it by being together, right? But look at any dystopian future, graphic novel, whatever, any of the cyberpunk genre. Best example I've got is Judge Dredd. You create these huge skyscrapers to house humanity within, and every single author says they would stay in place. They'd get everything off the TV. They'd get food delivered to them through this magical thing. You press a button and someone comes along with a bag, Uber Eats or whatever. We'd have wars between these two different blocks, these apartment blocks, because your community is, as you were talking about before, your community is where you live and your cultural norms. Well, we're block A, you're block B, you must be worse than us. Or every so often the sun goes, they get the sun and it blocks us. Oh, that's a reason to start a war, an interblock war.
Yeah.
I can see that happening. You can see that the fragmentation of society already started to polarize around that.
Do you remember the mouse or the rats taking drugs experiment? And you'd offer it water or heroin or water or cocaine or something. And the rat would eventually just keep going for the drug. And then somebody came and said, yeah, but you've done the experiment wrong because you caged the rat and left it by itself. So of course it did. What it needed was some kind of socialization, and then it actually was far healthier and happy to just have the water it needed, whatever it was. And that's, I suppose, yes, if we are isolated enough, living in a little pod, you would press a button, get your food delivered. And I used to work in theatre, right? So I used to have a career style, or the work style, where you'd come in to work, you'd roll around on the floor, you'd give somebody a massage, everybody would hug, they'd be all over each other, and then you'd go to your dressing room and you'd get undressed, and then you'd go on stage and you'd sweat on top of each other and you'd pour your hearts out. And now I work in an office on my own, and I just know I have to get out and interact with people, because I can't function properly, and I've really seen the two extremes.
There's going back to other weird 1960s experiments. There's one with some monkeys and a bunch of bananas and a water pistol, which is brilliant. So you put a number of monkeys in a cage, large environment. They've got everything they want, but up on a pedestal, which they can walk up to and get, is a bunch of bananas. Okay, it's food, and it's always visible. As if a monkey goes up there, every single one of the monkeys is sprayed with water. To the point, and you keep repeating this, to the point that the monkeys no longer go and get the food. Okay? You take a monkey out, you put a new monkey in, all the other monkeys are like, we're not going near the food. The new monkey's like, oh, food, brilliant, goes up to it. The other 7 monkeys don't want to get squirted. They grab that monkey, beat them up, and say, and basically, socially say, you're not doing that, and the new monkey learns. You keep repeating that process, constantly taking out old monkeys. Okay?
Yes.
To the point that you're now with 8 new monkeys who have never been sprayed with water before, but whenever a new monkey comes in and starts to walk up there, they beat up the new monkey, because that's what you do in this society. The field of evolutionary psychology, I think, is something that I was fascinated by when I studied it at university. And I was much more interested in criminal psychology, which is clearly why I became an accountant. But we don't spend enough time actually understanding what we are and how we're actually wired and how that plays out. So, I'm trying to bring this back to fertility rates and what have you. The position that
I
we're
love
currently
evolutionary psychology though, so run with it.
So the position we're currently in is that we now have there are 2 fundamental ways that you can have procreation. You can either have a very promiscuous dating approach, so the male with the most assets and the strength and the way to protect that female is more likely to get access to that female, or you can have pairing, where the mother will go, okay, longer term, who's the best bet? It's not about assets now, it's probably about longer term decision making. What we have done is we've still got this male promiscuous approach. If you ask the average man how many sexual partners do you want in your life, over 20. Talk to a woman, same answer is probably about 5. So women are very much about this partnership approach. That's how they've biologically and they've developed. That's the evolutionary psychology. Men are slightly different. But what we've now got is Tinder and the ability to, rather than be working in a society of 100, 150, we're now working in a dating pool of millions. You
With
can
contraception.
literally, and contraception. So the promiscuous society has been completely enabled. And so anyone can go and approach anyone and have that promiscuity with none of the necessary consequences, both social and biological, being kids, that we would have had in our younger societies. So bizarrely, what that means is it actually reinforces the fact that we're going to have lower fertility rates.
Yes.
Because if with contraception you can have all the promiscuity you want, but none of the consequences, well, you're not going to have kids at the younger age when that sort of thing would naturally cause a problem. And it also means that people are making very bad choices around very bad choices is the wrong turn of phrase. They're making a choice that we're not actually evolutionary wired to make.
Yes.
And that again causes societal problems, because
and this is one of the reasons why it's so hard to talk about, is because you have this male incels, these young generation who just don't have access to women. So I think a load of things happen. I think women have done very well in their careers, and when evolutionarily, if you're going to choose the man who's the best bet for you, he's either aligned with you on status or he's somewhere above you. And the better you do as a woman, the smaller that pool of male talent gets. Men less so there's weird behavior happening. And then you have video games and more reasons to just lock yourself in at home. We had a pandemic, which really locked people in at home. And then you get this internet culture of this whole red pill thing where angry young men without access to women have very warped views of what relationships should be and how they should be treated, and have resentment. And the same happens on the other side with women who have access to everything they want from the top men and expect 6-figure salaries from everybody. And you just get this weird situation where the men and women are looking at each other with these strange warped ideas of you're not good enough or you're the problem, and it's not forming solid relationships. They have sexual, well, some of them have sexual, I don't know. It's actually very hard to get my head around all the different things that are going on. Yeah. I thought I was onto something, but those are problems. I don't know how they all intertwine.
You try having a 15-year-old son, mate, in the world where Adolescence has just come out on Netflix, and that's just, I'm blown my mind as to the scale of that particular issue. It's been fascinating that my conversations around life expectancy and aging population are coming at the same time as that. But you're absolutely right that I don't want to use the word incel because I think that gives it a connotation that is.
You're right.
I think the concept of an involuntary celibate, somebody who wants to be in a relationship, wants to procreate, wants to do that whole societal thing, but can't, it's a horrible phrase, access the female partner to allow them to do that, that is a huge problem. And we have to understand what's going on there. That you're absolutely right, that women have high standards. They demand high value mates. That is biological. That's evolutionary psychology 101.
And it's the best thing for society for women to choose the right man.
Exactly. But if your pool is 150 men in your camp or your village or your town, then necessarily there's a pecking order, and it all kind of works itself out. And yes, there will be some people who don't mate in that small environment, but they drop out and they get replaced, and that's fine. All of a sudden you're on Tinder and you've got thousands of potentially high value mates, let alone the lower value ones, showering you with praise and saying, I want to get to know you, I want your time. Because this, you can get, one of my cousins was showing me, she was using Tinder to date. She was based in London. She was getting messages from America and from Europe, mainland Europe, from men saying, I want to meet you and date you. Now, that's a dating pool that we are not biologically wired to cope with. And it causes societal problems, because suddenly that bloke down the road, or you meet in the pub, he's a nice guy. He might earn 60, 70,000 pounds a year, but he doesn't beat that hedge fund manager in New York or that entrepreneur in Germany. That's the challenge.
It's really difficult to solve.
The beauty of this, for me, is that I can't solve it. All we can do is to talk about it, and to say other people need to talk about it as well. And we need to have this society level conversation. Because between the two of us, we've probably said 5 or 6 things in this call that someone somewhere is going to go, oh, you can't say that, or that's inappropriate. And so I need to learn what the language I need to be using is, and how do I, because I need, with my daughters in mind, I really want to be part of this conversation, because I want to protect her rights to equality. But at the same time, recognizing that unless we solve this problem in 20, 30 years' time, when I hope to be able to hand this business to maybe even grandkids as yet unborn, who knows? I need there to be a viable business here and a viable society that works. So I need to have this solution. But the way I'm approaching it is, let's just get the conversation going, starting, and more people listening to it.
Yeah. I'm the only one that ever brings it up at family events. I see people trail off. Yeah, let's do it. Let's get this out there and maybe have more of this conversation. That was great, Michael. Thank you for that. Yeah, you've got such a grasp on the numbers. It's really, really useful for people, and I hope that this conversation helps people see the issue we are discussing and how complex it is. I imagine there's something to do with behavioral science that helps incentivize people the right way, so we never feel trapped or forced to do things that we don't want to as individuals that might be better for society. Yeah, it's one to watch, I suppose.
Exactly. Well, thank you for having me. If nothing else, it's been really good for my mental health. Be able to share this angst with someone who can listen, which is great.
Awesome. All right, I'll speak to you soon.